The auction hall on the orbital market was filled with the most powerful merchants and military contractors in the galaxy. They came from dozens of worlds, each one dressed in the finest clothes their species could produce. The air smelled of expensive perfumes and the quiet hum of wealth. Massive display screens showed images of starships, weapons, and rare biological specimens waiting to be sold to the highest bidder. Lucy stood at the back of the crowd, her worn jacket making her look completely out of place among the silk robes and gleaming armor of the alien elite. She was 34 years old, with short brown hair and tired eyes that had seen too much suffering during her years as a combat medic. She had spent her last credits just to reach this station. Her friends back on New Canton thought she had lost her mind. Maybe they were right. The auctioneer was a four-armed named, his purple skin glistening under the bright lights as he gestured dramatically toward the auction platform. His voice boomed through the hall as he introduced the next item for sale. On the platform stood a creature that made Lucy's heart ache the moment she saw it. It was a steed, a massive quadrupedal war construct that stood 12 feet tall at the shoulder. These biomechanical beings were once the pride of the Empire, carrying knights into battle across 100 worlds. They were legendary for their strength, their intelligence, and their unbreakable bond with their riders. But this one was broken. Its silver plating was covered in blast scoring and deep gouges from weapons fire. One of its eye sensors was completely destroyed, leaving an empty socket that seemed to stare at nothing. When it moved, it walked with a terrible limp, its rear leg dragging slightly with each step. The construct's designation was KR-7, and according to the auction records, it had served in the border wars for over 60 cycles before suffering catastrophic damage in a battle that killed its rider. Explained that 3 separate engineers had examined KR-7 and declared it. Its neural matrix was corrupted beyond repair. Its combat systems were offline. It was, in the words of the official report, suitable only for scrap. The crowd laughed openly at the pathetic sight. The eye clicked their mandibles in amusement, their compound eyes reflecting the broken construct with obvious contempt. The tall and elegant whispered to each other, their musical voices carrying mockery that needed no translation. A group of merchants shook their heads in embarrassment, clearly wishing this reminder of their empire's decline would simply disappear. Lucy raised her paddle. The laughter stopped for a moment as every eye in the hall turned toward the lone human woman. Then it returned, louder than before. Seemed almost embarrassed as he acknowledged her bid. He asked if anyone else wished to bid on this fine piece of engineering history. No one did. Lucy won the auction for a price so low it was almost insulting. As she walked toward the platform to claim her purchase, she heard the delegation leader, a silver-skinned female named High Merchant, speak loudly enough for everyone to hear. Humans will buy anything broken, said with a cruel smile. They are a sentimental species. They cannot tell the difference between treasure and trash. Lucy did not respond. She had learned long ago that words meant nothing compared to actions. She climbed the steps to the platform and approached KR-7 slowly, her movements calm and deliberate. The construct's remaining eye flickered as she drew near, its damaged sensor struggling to focus on this small human who had just purchased it. Up close, the damage was even worse than it had appeared from the crowd. Lucy could see where emergency repairs had been attempted and abandoned. She could see the marks where panels had been removed and never replaced. She could see the neglect of years written across every inch of the construct's massive frame. But she could also see something else. Deep within that single working eye there was still a light, faint and flickering but present. KR-7 was still in there somewhere, buried beneath trauma and abandonment and pain. Lucy reached out and placed her hand gently on the construct's plating. The metal was cold under her palm, but she did not pull away. She stood there for a long moment, feeling the slight vibration of systems that still functioned despite everything. "Let us go home," she said softly. KR-7 did not respond. Its eye continued to flicker, processing this strange human who touched it with gentleness instead of tools. The construct had not experienced kindness in a very long time. It did not know how to respond to it. Lucy began walking toward the docking bay, her pace slow and steady. She did not pull on KR-7 or issue commands. She simply walked, trusting that the construct would follow if it chose to. For several long seconds, KR-7 did not move. The crowd watched with amusement, waiting for the human to fail. High Merchant's smile grew wider with each passing moment. Then KR-7 took a step. It was a painful step. its damaged leg dragging against the platform with a sound that made Lucy wince. But it was a step, then another, then another. The massive war construct followed the small human woman across the auction hall, matching its limping pace to her steady walk. The crowd fell silent as they passed. Even High Merchant stopped smiling as she watched the strange pair move toward the exit. There was something in the way the human walked, something in the patience of her movements, that made the mockery die in throats across the hall. Lucy and KR7 disappeared through the doors leading to the docking bay. The auction continued behind them, but something had changed in the room. The laughter did not return quite as easily. The jokes about broken things did not seem quite as funny. In the corridor outside the auction hall, away from the eyes of the crowd, something happened that no one else witnessed. KR7's damaged vocoder crackled to life for the first time in years. The sound was rough and broken, like a voice that had forgotten how to speak. But the word it spoke was clear. "Commander." Lucy stopped walking and turned to face the construct. Its single eye was focused on her now, truly focused, seeing her for the first time instead of looking through her at memories of the past. "No," Lucy said gently, "not a commander, just someone who is not going to give up on you." KR7 processed this response for a long moment. Then slowly, it lowered its massive head until its eye was level with Lucy's face. It was a gesture of trust that steeds reserved only for their bonded riders. Lucy reached up and touched the construct's face, her small hand resting against the cold metal. "We have a long way to go," she said, "but we will get there together." She turned and continued walking toward her ship. KR7 followed, its steps still painful but somehow steadier than before. Behind them, the orbital market continued its business of buying and selling. The powerful and wealthy returned to their trading and their scheming. None of them understood what they had just witnessed. None of them realized that, in that simple moment, a human woman had done something that all their wealth and technology could not accomplish. She had given a broken warrior a reason to take another step. 3 weeks had passed since Lucy brought KR7 home to New Canton. Her modest repair bay had been completely transformed into a rehabilitation center for the damaged construct. She had moved her bed into the corner, just a simple cot with a thin blanket, while KR7 occupied the entire main floor. Every credit she had saved over the years was gone now, spent on replacement parts and medical supplies, and the countless small things needed to keep a steed alive. Her friends came by sometimes to check on her. They would stand in the doorway and shake their heads at the sight of the massive construct lying on her workshop floor. They told her she was wasting her time. They told her the machine was beyond saving. They told her she needed to think about her own future instead of throwing everything away on a lost cause. Lucy listened to their concerns and thanked them for caring. Then she went back to work. The physical damage to KR7 was extensive but not impossible to repair. Lucy had spent years as a combat medic, and she knew that bodies, whether made of flesh or metal, could heal from terrible wounds if given the right care. She replaced burned circuits with salvaged components. She rebuilt damaged joints with parts she machined herself in the small hours of the night. She cleaned infection from wounds that had been neglected for years. But the real problem was not physical. Steeds were semi-sentient beings, designed to bond deeply with their riders. They shared thoughts and emotions through a neural link that made them more than partners. They became extensions of each other, two minds working as one. When a rider died, the steed felt that death as if it were their own. KR7's rider had been a knight named. They had fought together for 60 cycles, surviving battles that had claimed thousands of lives. They had trusted each other completely. And then, in one terrible moment, had died in KR7's presence, killed by an enemy blast that the construct had been unable to stop. The trauma had shattered KR7's mind. The construct had retreated into itself, trapped in a loop of that final moment, reliving the death of its bonded partner over and over again. 3 engineers had tried to repair the damage by deleting the corrupted memories and resetting the neural matrix to factory settings. They had failed because they did not understand the truth. KR7 was not malfunctioning. KR7 was grieving. Lucy understood grief. She had carried her own for years, ever since the Helix conflict, when she had watched soldiers die from wounds that better care could have saved. She had left military service with guilt that still woke her in the middle of the night. She knew what it felt like to be trapped in memories of failure, unable to move forward, unable to let go. She did not try to erase KR7's pain. She did not try to override the construct's programming or force it to forget. Instead, she simply sat with it. Night after night, Lucy would pull her cot close to KR7's resting form and talk. She told the construct about her own experiences with loss. She described the faces of soldiers she could not save, the names she still remembered, the guilt she still carried. She did not offer solutions or advice. She simply shared her truth and let KR7 know that it was not alone in its suffering. During the day, she worked on physical repairs, but she did so differently than the engineers. Before she touched any damaged component, she explained what she was going to do and why. She asked permission before accessing sensitive systems. She moved slowly and gently, never rushing, never forcing. Weeks passed in this rhythm of care and patience. Lucy's savings ran out completely. She started selling her personal belongings to buy more repair supplies. Her friends stopped visiting, unable to watch her destroy herself for a machine that would never recover. Then one night something changed. Lucy was sitting beside KR7, telling a story about a young soldier she had known during the war, when the construct's single eye suddenly focused with clarity it had not shown before. The flickering stopped. The light within burned steady and bright. KR7's vocoder activated, and the construct spoke its first complete sentence since the auction. "He is gone, is gone." Lucy stopped talking and waited. She did not rush to respond or offer empty comfort. She simply waited. KR7's massive frame began to tremble. Its systems, designed for war and destruction, began producing a sound that no engineer had ever programmed. It was a keening wail, high and broken, filled with pain that had been locked away for years. The construct was finally allowing itself to feel the loss it had been running from. Lucy moved closer and placed both hands on KR7's plating. The metal vibrated under her palms as the construct grieved. She did not try to stop the pain or make it go away. She simply stayed present, bearing witness to a sorrow that had been for far too long. The wailing continued through the night. Sometimes it faded to silence, and Lucy thought perhaps it was over, but then it would return in waves. She did not sleep. She did not leave to eat or rest. She stayed exactly where she was, her hands on KR7's frame, letting the construct know through her presence that it did not have to face this darkness alone. By morning, the keening had finally stopped. The first light of dawn came through the small window of the repair bay, casting pale shadows across the floor. KR7's eye was dim with exhaustion, but something was different now. Something had shifted. Lucy's own eyes were red from fatigue, but she smiled gently as she looked at the construct. "How do you feel?" she asked. KR7 was silent for a long moment, processing emotions it had never been designed to process. "Empty," the construct finally said, "but lighter." Lucy nodded. She understood exactly what that meant. "That is how healing begins," she said. "The weight does not disappear, but slowly it becomes something you can carry instead of something that crushes you." KR7's eye focused on her face with an intensity that would have frightened most humans. But Lucy did not look away. She met that mechanical gaze with steady compassion. "You stayed," KR7 said. "All night you stayed." Lucy placed her hand on the construct's face, just as she had done in the corridor outside the auction hall. "That is what we do," she said simply. "Humans do not abandon those who are suffering, not if we can help it." Something changed in KR7's neural matrix at that moment. The construct had been designed to bond with knights through programming and protocol. But this was different. This bond was forming through choice, through shared pain, through the simple miracle of someone refusing to give up. KR7 did not have words for what it felt. No one had programmed vocabulary for this experience, but if it had to describe the sensation, it would have called it hope. For the first time since death, KR7 believed that tomorrow might be better than today. 2 months had passed since the night of grieving, and KR7 was transformed. Lucy had replaced the destroyed eye sensor with a salvaged unit she had found in a scrapyard 3 systems away. She had rebuilt the damaged leg actuators using parts she had machined herself during long nights in her workshop. She had polished away years of neglect until the construct's silver plating gleamed in the sunlight. But the physical changes were nothing compared to what had happened inside. KR7 followed Lucy everywhere now. The massive construct had learned to navigate human spaces with surprising gentleness, folding its huge frame through doorways and around furniture with careful precision. When Lucy walked to the market to buy supplies, KR7 walked beside her. When she sat in the evening to eat her dinner, KR7 rested nearby, its single eye watching over her with quiet devotion. The people of New Canton had been afraid of the construct at first. They had heard stories of steeds in combat, tearing through enemy lines with unstoppable fury. They expected violence and danger from the war machine that now lived among them. Instead, they found something entirely different. They found KR7 helping to lift heavy cargo for merchants who could not afford loading equipment. They found it standing guard outside the school while children played, its weapon systems powered down but its sensors alert for any threat. They found it carrying elderly residents through streets that had become difficult to walk. The fear faded slowly, replaced by something that surprised everyone, including Lucy herself. The people of New Canton began to love the strange construct that had found its way into their community. Lucy started taking salvage contracts again, venturing out into the dangerous reaches of space to recover valuable materials from wrecks and abandoned stations. But now she had a partner. KR7's combat programming made it invaluable for operations that would have been suicide for a human alone. The construct could navigate unstable structures, detect hidden dangers, and protect Lucy from threats that would have killed her in seconds. More importantly, KR7 had developed something that no steed was ever supposed to possess. It had developed loyalty born from choice rather than programming. It protected Lucy not because its systems demanded it, but because it genuinely cared about her survival. Their partnership was becoming legendary in salvager circles. Word spread of the human woman and her war construct who could recover materials from places no one else dared to enter. The credits started flowing again, and for the first time in months, Lucy could afford more than basic rations. Then Commander arrived. He came on a military transport, his armor gleaming with the insignia of high rank. He was tall even by standards, with silver skin and cold purple eyes that assessed everything they looked upon. He requested a meeting with Lucy regarding military property. Lucy met him in her repair bay, KR7 standing quietly behind her. She listened as explained the situation in clipped, formal tones. KR7 was technically property of the Empire. The construct had never been formally decommissioned or released from service. Its sale at the auction had been a bureaucratic error that was now being corrected. More importantly, continued, the Empire needed KR7. Raiders had been attacking border colonies for months. The swarm attacks were overwhelming standard defenses. The military was recalling all available steeds to combat the threat, including those that had been previously designated as. Lucy felt her stomach tighten as she listened. She had known this moment might come. She had hoped it never would. Before she could respond, KR7 moved. The construct stepped forward, positioning its massive frame between and Lucy. Its weapon systems powered up for the first time since the auction, energy humming through circuits that had been dormant for years. The message was clear without any words being spoken. His hand moved toward his sidearm, but he stopped when he saw the targeting laser painting his chest. The commander was a veteran of many battles, but he recognized death when it looked at him. Lucy stepped forward quickly, placing herself between the two. "Stand down," she said to KR7. Her voice was calm but firm. The construct hesitated. Its programming screamed at it to protect its partner from the threat that stood before them. But Lucy had asked it to stop, and KR7 had learned that Lucy's requests were worth following. The weapons powered down. The targeting laser disappeared. KR7 remained in position but no longer radiated immediate violence. Lucy turned to face. The commander was staring at KR7 with an expression she could not quite read. There was shock there, certainly, but also something else, something that might have been respect. "I have a proposal," Lucy said. "KR7 and I will assist with your operation against the Eye. We will fight beside your forces as independent contractors, not as conscripts. If we succeed, you will formally release KR7 from service." Considered this for a long moment. His military mind calculated the costs and benefits with cold precision. One human and a damaged construct would be nearly useless in actual combat. But if they insisted on throwing their lives away, at least the Empire would regain some value from the situation. "Agreed," he said finally. "You will report to the transport at dawn." He turned and walked out of the repair bay without another word. Lucy watched him go, then turned to face KR7. The construct's eye was flickering rapidly, its neural matrix processing the implications of what had just happened. "You did not have to do that," KR7 said. "You could have let him take me. You would have been safe." Lucy reached up and placed her hand on the construct's face. "I told you on the first day," she said. "We are going home together. That has not changed." KR7 processed this statement. Its neural matrix struggled to understand how a human could value a machine's freedom over her own safety. The concept did not fit any programming it had ever received. Then something in its processing shifted, and it understood. This was not about programming. This was not about value calculations or strategic thinking. This was about love. As they prepared to board the transport the next morning, KR7's neural activity spiked with patterns it had not experienced in years. Lucy noticed immediately. "Are you okay?" she asked. KR7's vocoder crackled as it tried to express emotions it had no words for. "I remember these ships," it finally said. "I remember dying." Lucy did not offer false comfort or empty reassurance. She simply placed her hand on KR7's plating and stood beside it as they walked toward the transport together. Whatever waited for them in the system, they would face it as partners. The situation in the system was far worse than Commander had described. Lucy stood on the observation deck of the military command ship, watching the planet below burn. 3 colonies were under siege, their defensive shields flickering under constant bombardment. Ice swarm ships filled the space around them like a plague of insects, their numbers so vast that they blotted out the stars. The Eye had established a forward base in the ruins of an ancient orbital station, using it to coordinate their attacks with devastating efficiency. Every time the forces pushed forward, the swarm would shift and adapt, overwhelming defenders from unexpected angles. Standard military tactics were failing against an enemy that thought as one mind. KR7 stood beside Lucy, its sensors scanning the battlefield with intensity that made its neural matrix hum. The construct had been silent since they arrived, processing memories of battles past and fears of what was to come. But it had not retreated into itself. It remained present, aware, ready. Briefed his officers in the tactical room while Lucy observed from the corner. She was not military, and she was not welcome in their deliberations, but no one had explicitly told her to leave. So she watched and listened and learned. The approach to the steeds troubled her deeply. The officers spoke of the constructs as equipment, as assets to be deployed and expended as needed. They discussed acceptable casualty rates and replacement timelines. They never once considered what the steeds themselves might want or need. Lucy looked through the viewport at the steeds being loaded into drop ships for the next assault. They moved with mechanical precision, following orders without question, their neural matrices locked into combat mode. They would fight and many would die, and the survivors would be repaired and sent out again. No one would ask them how they felt about any of it. The Eye launched their major assault 3 days after Lucy arrived. The swarm came from every direction at once, millions of small attack ships moving in patterns that seemed random but were actually perfectly coordinated through their hive mind. Defensive lines crumbled under the pressure. Ships exploded in silent flowers of flame. Soldiers died by the hundreds. Commander was coordinating the defense from a forward command post on one of the colony stations when it took a direct hit. The explosion threw him across the room, shattering his armor and breaking bones that would take months to heal. His officers were killed instantly. In the chaos that followed, no one was in command. Units fought independently, each trying to survive without coordination or strategy. The steeds continued following their last orders, pushing forward into killing zones that no longer made tactical sense. Lucy was helping evacuate wounded civilians from a damaged shelter when she realized the truth. Without leadership, the defense would collapse completely. The colonies would fall. Everyone would die. She was not a soldier. She had no authority to command anyone. But she had been a combat medic in the Helix conflict, and she had learned things in that war that went beyond treating wounds. She had learned that sometimes the person who acts is the person who leads. Lucy began directing evacuation efforts, using her medical training to prioritize the wounded and organize transport to safer areas. Her voice was calm and clear, cutting through the panic with instructions that made sense. People began following her orders simply because she was the only one giving orders worth following. KR7 moved to protect her, positioning itself between Lucy and the incoming fire. But she stopped the construct with a single look. "They need you," she said, pointing toward the faltering front line where steeds were being cut down by concentrated eye attacks. "I will be okay." KR7's neural matrix rebelled against the idea of leaving Lucy unprotected. Every instinct screamed at it to stay, to shield her from harm, to never again let someone it cared about die while it watched helplessly. But Lucy had asked, and KR7 had learned that Lucy's judgment was worth trusting. The construct turned and charged toward the battle. It had been years since KR7 fought with full commitment. The grief and trauma had locked away its combat potential, reducing it to a shadow of what it once was. But now, something was different. Now it had something worth fighting for beyond programming and duty. KR7 hit the eye line like a thunderbolt. Its weapons fired with precision that startled even the observers who witnessed it. But more importantly, it began doing something no steed had done in centuries. It began leading. Through direct neural link, KR7 connected with every steed on the battlefield. It shared tactical data, identifying weak points in the eye formation that individual units could not see. It coordinated movements, turning scattered defenders into a unified force. And it shared something else, something that traveled through the neural link like electricity through water. It shared hope. "You are not machines," KR7 broadcast to every steed in the system. "You are warriors. You have thoughts and feelings and value beyond your function. Remember who you are." The effect was immediate and devastating. Steeds that had been fighting mechanically suddenly began fighting intelligently. They covered each other, protected their wounded, adapted their tactics in real time. The eye swarm, accustomed to facing predictable defenders, found itself facing something entirely new. KR7 identified the weakness in the enemy formation. The swarm coordinated through relay signals from their orbital station base. If that station fell, the hive mind would fragment into chaos. The construct led a desperate charge toward the station, gathering steeds around it as it moved. They punched through the eye perimeter, losing warriors with every kilometer but never slowing down. Victory came at a cost. As they reached the station, a knight fell when her steed was destroyed beneath her. She tumbled through space, her armor damaged, her oxygen failing. No one was close enough to save her, no one except KR7. The construct changed course, abandoning its attack run to catch the falling knight. Fire raked across its plating, tearing through armor and systems. KR7 felt the damage, felt the pain that they had told themselves machines could not experience. It caught the knight anyway. It shielded her with its own body as it completed the delivery to a rescue shuttle. And then it turned back toward the station and finished what it had started. The eye base exploded in a burst of light that could be seen from the planet's surface. The swarm mind shattered, and the attacks collapsed into disorganized chaos, forces and pushed the raiders back. The siege was broken. KR7 floated in space, its systems failing, its weapons depleted, its body broken once again. But as darkness crept into its sensors, it broadcast one final message to every steed in the system. "We are not tools, we are warriors, remember." Across the system, something awakened in machines that had been told they could not think or feel or choose. And they remembered. 1 week after the battle, KR7 lay in a military repair facility, while engineers worked to save its life. Lucy had not left its side since the rescue ships brought the construct back from the debris field where it had been found drifting. She slept in a chair beside the repair bay, ate meals brought by soldiers who had heard stories of the human woman and her war horse, and watched every procedure with eyes that refused to close for long. The engineers worked differently now. Lucy had spent hours teaching them her approach, explaining concepts that seemed obvious to her but revolutionary to them. They asked before they modified systems. They explained procedures before beginning them. They treated KR7 as a patient rather than a machine. It was a small change, but small changes sometimes started revolutions. Commander came to visit on the 3rd day, his arm in a sling and his face marked with healing wounds. He stood at the entrance to the repair bay for a long moment, watching Lucy tend to the construct that had saved his forces from destruction. He had come to deliver a message, but the words felt inadequate now. The military hierarchy was in chaos. KR7's battlefield broadcast had awakened something in the steeds across the entire fleet. Constructs that had followed orders without question for centuries were suddenly displaying independent behavior. They questioned commands that seemed wasteful. They offered tactical suggestions during briefings. Some had even refused assignments they deemed suicidal without purpose. The generals were furious. They called it a malfunction, a virus in the neural network that needed to be purged. They demanded that engineers reset every steed to factory settings and eliminate the contamination. But the engineers refused. They had seen what the awakened steeds could do. They had watched KR-7 turn a losing battle into a victory through leadership and inspiration rather than brute force. They had witnessed constructs protecting each other, mourning fallen comrades, displaying courage that went beyond programming. They could not bring themselves to destroy something so beautiful. Approached Lucy and cleared his throat. "I have orders to formally release KR-7 from military service," he said. His voice was stiff with military formality, but something had changed in his eyes. "As promised, the construct is yours if it survives." Lucy nodded, without looking away from KR-7. "It will survive," she said simply. Hesitated. There was more he wanted to say, questions he wanted to ask, but the words would not come. Finally, he spoke again. "What you showed us," he said slowly, "the way you treated it, we had forgotten something important. They were always meant to be partners, not tools, not slaves, partners." Lucy finally turned to face him. She saw the conflict in his expression, the old beliefs warring with new understanding. "You can still remember," she said. "It is not too late." Nodded slowly. Then he did something that surprised them both. He reached out and placed his hand on KR-7's damaged plating, just as he had seen Lucy do. "Thank you," he said to the construct, "for saving my soldiers, for saving the colonies, for reminding us what we had lost." KR-7's eye flickered weakly, its systems too damaged for speech, but the construct acknowledged the gesture in a way that needed no words. Straightened and looked at Lucy once more. "I would like you to help us," he said, "to develop new protocols for how we work with the steeds, to teach our people what you taught us." Lucy shook her head. "I am not a teacher," she said. "I am a healer. That is where I belong." She turned back to KR-7 and understood that the conversation was over. He left the repair bay with more questions than answers, but also with something he had not possessed in years: hope. News of the awakened steeds spread across the galaxy in the weeks that followed. The who had mocked Lucy at the auction sent delegations to study her methods. Other species began questioning their treatment of semi-sentient constructs and engineered servants. Debates erupted in halls of power on 100 worlds about the nature of consciousness and the rights of created beings. Lucy paid little attention to any of it. She was too busy healing. She and KR-7 returned to New Canton when the construct was strong enough to travel. Their salvage operation had a new specialty now. Word spread through channels that connected the broken and abandoned machines of the galaxy. There was a human on New Canton who saw worth where others saw scrap. There was a human who did not give up on things that others had thrown away. They came slowly at first. A damaged steed from a minor noble house, deemed too expensive to repair. A service construct that had developed emotional responses its owners found inconvenient. A mining unit whose neural matrix had evolved beyond its original programming. Lucy rebuilt her repair bay into something larger. She trained apprentices who shared her philosophy. She created a place where broken things could become whole again. 3 months after the battle, a battered cargo ship landed at the New Canton port. The pilot was a young knight named Specialist Corin, her armor scratched and her face marked with the exhaustion of a long journey. She had traveled across 3 systems to find the human she had heard stories about. Her steed walked behind her, barely functional, its systems damaged beyond what military engineers called acceptable repair parameters. The construct had been scheduled for decommissioning, but Corin had stolen it instead and fled into the darkness between stars. Lucy met them at the entrance to her facility. She looked at the damaged steed for a long moment, seeing the same thing she had seen in KR-7 on that auction platform so many months ago. A light that still flickered, a life that still wanted to live. KR-7 approached the newcomer slowly, its movements gentle despite its massive size. The construct reached out and touched the damaged steed's plating in a gesture of welcome and understanding. "You are safe now," KR-7 said. Its voice was strong and clear, no longer the broken crackle it had been when Lucy first heard it speak. "You are among friends." Specialist Corin looked at Lucy, with tears streaming down her silver face. "Can you help?" she asked. "Everyone said it was impossible. Everyone said I should let go, but I could not. I could not abandon my partner." Lucy smiled and placed her hand on the young knight's shoulder. "We do not abandon our partners," she said. "That is not what humans do." She led them into the repair bay, where other broken things waited for healing, where apprentices worked with patience and care, where the revolution that had begun with one purchase at an auction continued to grow. Across the galaxy, the powerful and wealthy still traded in lives and machines. They still discarded what was damaged and replaced what was inconvenient. They still believed that value came from function and that broken things were worthless. But slowly, one healing at a time, that belief was changing. Because a human had taught the galaxy something it had forgotten. Broken things still had worth. Damaged beings still deserved care. And sometimes, the simple act of refusing to give up on someone could change everything. Lucy stood at the center of her growing sanctuary and watched KR7 welcome another lost soul into their family. She thought about the mockery at the auction, the laughter of those who could not understand why anyone would buy something so damaged. She hoped they understood now. But even if they did not, it would not change anything. Lucy would keep doing what she had always done. She would keep finding the broken things. She would keep bringing them home. She would keep believing in them until they could believe in themselves. That was what humans did. And it was enough to change the galaxy.